Yeah, so today we'll be talking about overcoming cognitive biases, stakeholder biases in particular. For the beginning, just a few words about me. For the last almost 10 years, I've been working in different kind of companies. Started as a freelancer, continued in software development company, and recently I've been working in financial giant Fidelity Investments. And also, I was a speaker at different conferences, lecturer for a few design schools, and I've been writing articles for different platforms. And as I mentioned, today I will focus on stakeholder biases, some stuff that can prevent them from considering new ideas or interfere with their perception. And also about biases that can curse us when we do our research. But also, there are so many ways that they can be applicable directly to our decisions in UI elements. And if you're interested in those, here's my articles on Medium that shed some lights on the topic. I don't know if there will be any sharing of materials, but you can just find me on LinkedIn and gladly share it with you if you're interested in those. So for today, I'm going to start with 3 short stories, or rather situations, that I believe that majority of us can recognize ourselves in. So first one, imagine that you come up with this amazing hypothesis for your product. You start testing and few people seem to contradict the idea. So do you continue seeking for confirmation your hypothesis? Do you feel like helping people to come to the right conclusion? Or do you accept its disproof easily? Or here's another story. So you are hired to redesign legacy system. You did UX audit and it looks awfully user unfriendly and everyone agree with this. But you started interviewing employees and suddenly you faced confrontation. They do realize that the system is extremely sufficient, but they still don't want to cooperate once they understand that changes are coming. So would you do something about that or just continue taking their questionable input? And the last story, and I believe it's a very common one. Last year I was on at Nielsen Norman training, and I heard stories like that great amount of times from our fellow designers of all levels and companies. So imagine that you and your team need some more budget or time for doing more research. So you spoke with some executive person about value of such research. You prepared very professional presentation. You talked about all possible methods and frameworks. You used all fancy designer words and terminology. You actually did a great job, right? But then your department still didn't get a budget and you didn't get support from executive level. What a disappointment, right? I'll be back to those stories shortly. But before that, I want to quickly read a definition of cognitive bias. So cognitive bias is a systematic pattern of deviation from norm or rationality in judgment. So human brain has a tendency to simplify information processing through a filter of personal experience. And the filtering process is a coping mechanism that enables the brain to prioritize and process large amounts of information quickly. There are almost 200 known cognitive biases so far. And I can assume that majority of you heard about such popular biases as confirmation bias, which is tendency to search or favor information in a way that confirms or supports your prior beliefs or values. Or anchoring, the bias that causes us to rely too heavily on information that we received early in the decision-making process. Most famous example of that is how we show that something is on sale. They always show new price compared to old bigger one. Or sunk cost fallacy, buyers that force us to finish an interesting book or film. It's a phenomenon when person is reluctant to abandon a course of action because they have invested heavily in it, even when it is clear that abandonment would be more beneficial. Or, of course, Dunning-Kruger effect, when people with limited competence in particular domain overestimate their real abilities. So basically, a lot of them now are really popular and repeatedly discussed. But today, I want to talk about a few less known biases, but they're extremely widespread in our work. I can tell that I notice them so often in my and my colleagues' behavior. Just a little disclaimer, I'm not a psychologist and I don't have a degree in this particular field. So I won't talk about any neuroscience peculiarities. But I fell in love with this topic after reading Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And since I started connecting the dots between biases and my work. So now let's go back to our stories I told you at the beginning and try to recognize at least few cognitive biases here. So in our first story about product hypothesis and their testing, we might have faced congruence bias. It is the tendency of people to over-rely on testing their initial hypothesis, the most congruent one, while neglecting to test alternative ones. And when testing is already going on, another bias comes in place, which is observer expectancy bias. When a researcher expects a given result and therefore subconsciously manipulates an experiment and influence the participant of this experiment. Like this happens when you ask leading or closed questions in testing sessions. When you ask people, will you use this product or will you use this function? And in this case, actually another bias might turn on, which is courtesy bias, when people don't want to offend us or hurt our feelings, and therefore don't tell us the truth or the whole truth. So we really try to avoid this. In our second story about the designing a legacy system, we definitely recognize ambiguity aversion or uncertainty aversion. It is the tendency to favor the known over the unknown, including known risks over unknown risks. And actually a very similar one, status quo bias. It is a preference for the maintenance of current or previous state of affairs. It is a preference to not take any action to change this current state. No matter how bad things are going on, when changes come, most people tend to freak out, freeze, and stay where they are rather than taking a slightest risk. So despite realizing all insufficiency that current system might have, people are extremely lazy to change their habits. And it's even worse when people are afraid that the new system will replace them. And the third story is my favorite because curse of knowledge is definitely one of my favorite biases. This bias occurs when person communicating with other people assume that these people have the background to understand what you are talking about. Let's remember about this bias when speaking with users, stakeholders, or any persons that are outside of our professional field. Importance and value of design research may be so obvious to us, right? All the methodology sounds so familiar and easy, but the truth is nothing of it is obvious to our business stakeholders or sometimes company leadership. And actually, that shouldn't be. They have enough on their plates that we don't understand, right? That's why it should be a part of our job to explain everything in plain, ordinary language. So to ensure that they are on the same page with us. So instead of using some pretentious smart words that can impress our colleagues, let's try and use simple ones. And here's, I'd like to summarize some coping techniques for this specific biases. So with congruence bias, continuous discovery will help. Let's assure that we have time to learn from our iterations in each sprint. For example, if we are working in agile environment. So traditionally product discovery is the first stage of the product development journey. So once you gather users' needs, pain, etc., you move on to the delivery stage. And you kind of feel confident that you're building something that users actually want. But the digital product is now finished. So discovery shouldn't stop once you start delivering your validated product. This approach has been popularized by authors of Continuous Discovery Habits, Teresa Torres. And according to this book, you should be gathering insights from customers on at least a weekly basis. And these insights can be gathered through prototype tests, customer interviews, surveys, etc. In fact, nearly any research method can be adapted to this continuous discovery process. For avoiding observer expectancy bias, we must review all our questions from the point of objectivization. And really great resource for this is book named The Mom Test by Rob Fitzpatrick. And a lot of great advices for building scripts and test hypotheses there. So the Mom Test has 3 rules. First one, talk about their life instead of your idea. Second, generics. That ask about specifics in the past instead of generics or opinions about the future. And third is to remember that you should talk less and listen more. Ask open-ended questions. Instead of, do you like this feature? Better ask, what feature have you used the most lately? Try to get to know users' real behavior rather than hypothetical. Ask, describe situation when you needed this last month, rather than when do you think it will be beneficial for you? And of course, don't forget about clarifying questions. They can reveal the whole truth or sometimes users' real motivation. For reducing ambiguity aversion, try to get acquainted with your stakeholders. If you're collaborating via workshop, you have amazing opportunity to do icebreaker exercises to get acquainted with participants. You can find a great amount of them on the internet. Just find what fits your particular situation. For example, I like to use game 2 truths, 1 lie, when people are supposed to write down 2 real facts about themselves and 1 lie, and then everyone tried to guess what is what. And that one is atmosphere and break borders. Actually, it's hard to emphasize the difference before and after this exercise. People are so much more open and relaxed, and so they're prone to be productive and give meaningful insights. And when you're facing status quo bias, try and frame your message the way that reduce all possible risk and negativity. Try to leverage on upcoming benefits and avoid mentioning possible losses and changes. We can fight this bias by using another one, the framing effect. And it is a cognitive bias where people decide on options based on positive or negative connotations. So, for example, sentence, the odds of survival 1 month after surgery are 90% is more reassuring than an equivalent statement that mortality within 1 month after surgery is 10%, right? So when we face people's resistance to change, let's focus on positive aspects those changes will bring to their work and maybe personal life. And course of knowledge. For this one, identify differences in background between you and your audience. Doing your homework by researching your stakeholders' background is always a good idea. Not only because of the insights that you might find out, but also for you to realize your differences. Accept that you might be living in totally different worlds and they don't necessarily have to understand what you are talking about. Don't be afraid to sound too simple. It can never hurt conversation. On the contrary, it can ease cognitive load, and therefore your audience will understand your point better and take your side. And just a few advices that are fair, I believe, for avoiding most of the biases in general. First one, learn about possible biases. So recent research reveals it is in fact possible to reduce biases through training. I will not tell you the details of this research, but in that study, researchers provided one group with information that helps participants understand the topic of cognitive biases. Only after that, they were to make decision on some case. And the second study group wasn't provided with such training. And the results showed that such training reduced the effects of those biases by 29%. So we are not total prisoners of our subconsciousness. Second one, decrease cognitive load, which is the ease with which our brain process information. Don't overkill with it. As we remember that biases are just our coping mechanism for simplification. And when you overload with tons of details, people's biases are thriving. Third one, use processes and checklists. We can't just switch off our biases, no matter how much we know about them. So use predefined and approved processes, especially when we are conducting research with all different people. Never go to interview or usability testing without a script. Therefore, you will have less chances to fall into our own mind tricks. Of course, frame your message. Again, framing is a huge bias that affects us. We tend to see risk when negative connotation is presented and don't see them with positive one. So review your message from this point before exposing it to people. And fifth, of course, give it a time. As cognitive biases are just shortcuts for our brain, let's not push decisions making right away. Otherwise, they will be biased the most. And just a few words about ethical design. So this topic becomes more and more popular nowadays. Some companies start realizing how much influence they have on people and their lives. Maybe you remember a film named Social Dilemma that emphasizes on manipulating technologies and how they step by step distort our perception of pretty much everything. And the fact is that lion's share in such thing belongs to designers. Knowing human psychology helps us not only build a better product, but also gives us some kind of superpower to point user to the directions we need. So here are just a few questions that we can ask ourselves. Are users still in my focus? Am I considering the long-term effect of my design decisions? Am I ready to reveal what's behind the curtains? It's very easy to forget about social duty when trying to achieve some business goals. That's why I think every designer should think about the line they will never cross, especially regarding products for children and teenagers, as this audience is super easy to manipulate, and our impact on their lives can be enormous. So the bad news is that we can't get rid of cognitive biases completely. But the good one is that the better we understand them, the more we can do to leverage them for our own benefit or for benefit of our users. And just accept that we are human after all. It's our inevitable part. So let's embrace them rather than fighting some unnecessary battles. So that's all from me. Thank you for your time, and let's stay connected.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mariia. It kind of, I guess the first thing that I can say is when you put up that graph of like the hundreds and hundreds of different biases, it's kind of a little overwhelming in ways. So I love the examples that you gave on like focusing on 5 of them, but how are people, like, do you have any advice for people on how do you try keep on track of all of the different types of biases to make sure that when you're putting together your questions and you're asking that you're not trying to lead, but like maybe you're making 5 other mistakes? Do you have any advice on how to avoid?
I don't think that that it's possible for human to keep up with all that biases, except if you might be a psychologist or neuroscientist. But I don't think you need to, because it's not actually, not all of them are our enemy. It's just some like shortcuts that help us to move more quickly, and we don't need all the times to overthink each information. But I think just to remember some basic ones like no confirmation or this framing effects, it's helping a lot to already a lot to build our scripts and for interviews and testings, because like it's really helpful to just have a few of them like open on the one side and script on the other, and just to compare whether all your questions are like objectivized. Let's put it this way, because it's super easy to fall into our own biases. Like we can see, like we're human and we can see easily some biases in other people, but it's really much harder to see in ourselves. So just keep with few main ones, few powerful ones, and I think you'll be good.
Excellent. And a reminder to everybody out there, we have 3 more minutes for questions, so please do post any questions. You're getting a lot of thank yous, which is positive in the comments, so that's a good response. And Erin's asked about recording, so yes, we will be recording this and sharing the recordings afterwards, Erin, so you'll be able to catch up. While we're waiting, one of the other questions, and because you said avoid leading the person, like, and it's kind of talk about the last features you've used rather than do you like my feature. But what if your area of focus is on a particular part and you're trying to do research on that part and people just keep talking about something elsewhere that's not in your remit? What should a person do there? Should they just follow that thread and share it internally with other teams? but then they lose out on the insight and they're part of the product. Is there any kind of ways that you can nudge without influencing?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thanks. I think that with such situation, all like additional questions usually helps like to reveal the motivation why they're talking about this particular thing and not about what you're expecting. Maybe what you're expecting is it's your own bias, and that's not what we are actually looking for. If people keep talking about something else, maybe that's what we should focus our attention for too. And I guess even if we are talking about some new products, there's like no features, no products, we can always ask about how they deal with this situation without any products on the market, some any other ways they deal before, because definitely if there is a problem, then there is some coping mechanism they have before. So I think like that. I don't know if I answer, but
it's a good one. It's kind of indicating where we should focus. We have more questions coming in, but I'll just ask Cindy's question because she asked it first, and then we'll what we'll do is we'll post some more questions on our Slack group. So if anybody wants to join in there, I'll invite Mariia to answer the other ones. But Cindy's question is, would keeping a checklist of all the criteria and seeing if our questions match the criteria be good, or is it overdoing it?
Wow, it's a good question, but I think that depends on how much time you have. And again, we are human, and there will always be some kind of mistakes. That's okay. But if we are already making an effort and doing this old checklist, and not that deep maybe, but at least some kind of we understand that we did it, and we try to avoid subjectivization, and we try to like keep ourselves outside this particular interview or testing, then I think that will be enough. If all designers will do at least this, we'll be living in better world.
Yeah, it's kind of, I guess, balancing. You need to do your best without becoming very rigid and robot as well.
Yeah, there is never end to the research and doing digital products.
Brilliant. Well, that brings us to time. So Stacey, we'll ask your question on the Slack channel. And if anybody has any other questions, please keep posting them, and we'll just post those through to Mariia on our Slack channel after the event. But thank you. And on behalf of everybody else, thank you very much, Mariia.
Thank you.